1 year ago, I tried to make a roguelike in 1 month, and the results were surprisingly not bad. Several months later, and due to an overwhelming popularity, I decided to throw my unfinished 4-year-long endless runner under the bus, and I revived Rogue Pocket Quest long-term late last year. My next big objective for the game? Loot, and lots of it. I said to myself, this will only take about a month, and if you know anything about game dev, that was a lie. So about 6 months later, here we are, and to understand how it took so long, we need to go all the way back. And before we get into it, I've officially set up a Discord server to support the game, linked below, so more on that later. Now if we put aside other factors like work-life balance, family, other projects and opportunities, game development, or in this specific case game design, just takes a really f***ing long time. So going all the way back to December, after implementing some further changes, it was time to incorporate loot. And for that, I needed to design both the loot itself and an inventory system. At first I wanted some kind of infinitely generating random loot so that it was always unique, and after putting more than 10 brain cells of thought into the design, I realized that idea was just stupid. Because the items need sprites, names, and to have different effects that weren't completely random, as I wanted to avoid creating the best item and instead creating a range of unique items best for the player's preferences and build. But I kept refining the ideas and got designing, and with a little inspiration from RuneScape, I came up with my ideas and structure for 70 unique items with 6 different variants each. But first, we need an inventory system. I've never done anything the way I was thinking in my head before, and had to consider mobile interfaces as well. So I did the only thing I know how. I looked up a tutorial, but I don't remember which one. And we ended up with something like this, with a few placeholder items for now, but now you can pick them up and drop them in their respective categories. Although, we now have like a dozen problems with this design, but I'll get more into that later. With the idea for 70 unique items that hadn't all been designed yet, I was able to set up the system, at least for generating the loot with scriptable objects in a somewhat convoluted way that I'm not entirely going to get into. But this is all based on 4 categories: a secondhand item like a shield or magic item, your main weapon, a helmet, and your body armor. And the weapons specifically have 4 subcategories. So there are about 7 scriptable objects now, and each one contains every version of the type of the item it is, like the name of the sprite and its stats. All this information gets pulled from this during generation through a very complicated system and puts it into a single scriptable object for all of it to work with and adds it to the inventory list. I've been told of mishandling scriptable objects in general, which has caused several issues that have now been resolved, but it is my first time working with them. By now, you're probably getting pretty bored, which is good, because I would be here for another hour if I had to explain it all, but it all just works, and that's what matters, so moving on. So by the end of December, most of that was in place and generating with no effects, and I only had a few items that had original sprites. Christmas happened, summer holidays happened, some more work on my endless runner, and then suddenly, just like that, it's February in the blink of an eye. And the next significant amount of time spent aside from a combat refactor were literally just designing all the items. I had to come up with all of their names, what they looked like, put points into what stats they had, balancing and so forth, making the system for stat points applying to the player and how it handles it. So the idea is that all equipable items will affect your stats in some way, adding a specific amount of points to any of the 10 stats. And in an attempt to multiply the amount of items, I decided that each of the 70 items has 6 material types, and each material type increases by 1 on all of its base stats as it goes up in rarity. So the base material is rusty, which applies 0 points, then iron, which has all of the base stats, then obsidian, which doubles, viridian, which triples, elder crystal quadruples, and dragonstone multiplies by 5. So now we're close to 420 equipable items altogether. The material system was mainly inspired by RuneScape, which gave me an excuse to reuse the sprites by just changing the color. But the difference here is you can upgrade each item to the next level. So even if you get a rare item or an item that you really want that is rusty and is purely cosmetic while it's rusty, you can visit the blacksmith to upgrade it to iron and all the way up to dragonstone to get all of the additional points. That is, if you don't drop it when you die. So I've divided the weapons into 4 categories, all with different additional stats. Starting with daggers, they have a lower point distribution, but are always 35% faster at attacking on top of your attack speed. Swords, which are average all around with 2 or 3 points total, and don't affect anything else. Heavy weapons have a higher point distribution, mainly in strength, to make up for their reduced attack speed. I tried to come up with all kinds of designs for this one, like hammers and axes, maces and big blades. This was definitely one of the more fun categories to design. Magic weapons affect all stats as well, and additionally there are a few configurations like double and triple shots, which is still yet to be set up. And since you're dealing with a ranged advantage, melee damage from these weapons will be halved. And as for armor, there will be 3 slots that the player has. Starting with headwear, pretty simple and distributes 1 point, and not much else, but adds some nice cosmetics. Body armor again has more and varying degrees of point distribution, and I designed it specifically so that mage robes have percentage increases in movement speed, and that heavy armor with more points will reduce your speed by a small fraction too. Secondhand items were also a lot of fun, as I tried to come up with different items that weren't just shields, like spellbooks, orbs, and lanterns, that also enhance other properties like magic and energy. So overall, I'm pretty happy with all of these items. I think I created a unique range of designs for players to enjoy and pick up, and did my best to distribute points in a fair way so each item does something uniquely different. Along the way, there was also a major issue with the inventory system and the user experience of it. I slowly realized that the drag and drop system simply did not work well on mobile at all, and more importantly, did not cater to controller players either. There was also no way of seeing how the items affected the player at all, or what they were called. So something had to change. So I started pretty much almost fresh, and after working away non-stop on it, it ended up looking like this, with all of the final pixel art design. The first major change is now that we have item names and how they affect stats in the right panel. This column on the right represents how many points are distributed, and the left shows the player's current stats, which is all the equipped items and the player's base stats combined. The most important change, however, is tapping the items to bring up their info, which highlights the object and enables the buttons down here on the right to equip and drop, making it more friendly and better to use on mobile and when controls are implemented as well. This was surprisingly a lot of back-end work and took the most time. There are so many little things to deal with this highlighting box thing. When you remove an item, the whole list has to refresh in place where all the items are again and call and display the item in its highlighting. If it's the last item in the list of items, it has to drop down one and put the information in as well. If there are no more items after dropping it, it has to disappear and clear these boxes. The same thing happens when unequipping an item. There are just all these little things to juggle that it takes a lot of testing for every scenario, and it goes on. So moving on, to make managing your inventory easier, I added these little category filters up the top so you can now switch between all of them. Between melee weapons, magic weapons, secondhand items, armor, and consumables. Lastly, I've also set a limit on the player's inventory. The player will start off with 16 slots and can upgrade 8 at a time through the pub's blacksmith. Just pretend it's this guy for now. He doesn't do anything yet, but he will, and it will be a big part of the game at some point. And before we move on, I have to introduce you to something. This is the Stick of Shame. The Stick of Shame is given to the player who unequips or unexpectedly has no weapon. The Stick of Shame is a masterpiece of mediocrity. It will only deal 40% of your total damage and has no energy abilities. The Stick of Shame won't just lower your damage output, it will also lower your self-esteem. The Stick of Shame is a reminder that life is full of little humiliations, and this is one of them. The Stick of Shame, because every hero needs a moment of humility. So if you ever find yourself wielding the Stick of Shame, just remember, you've reached a new low. But at least you're providing comedic relief for everyone to laugh at you. Embrace the shame and try not to drop your weapon again. Thank you. And all of this took me up to somewhere in May where I tackled the last item type, consumables. Now right at the beginning when I planned this game a year ago, I had already come up with all of the food items by name, so that was the easy part. The hard part was refactoring the inventory system once again to account for stackable items, because we don't always want to use up the player's inventory space for food instead of the loot they want to collect and sell. Before doing the food, I started with these potions to get things rolling. After carefully injecting new code into the system that wasn't designed to have it, I got it working and set the stack to 6 with the ability again to upgrade 6 at a time. And the long tedious part was coming up with the sprites for every single one of these food items and then deciding what they should do. I managed to come up with 2 Kiwi inspiration ideas to put in there as well. It's amazing how you can spend several hours over a couple of days just kind of staring into a spreadsheet, sitting there and thinking and deciding how everything should work, how to balance it, and come up with the right descriptions. So most of the food applies temporary boosts to the stats described of a secret value. Some food items do things other than affecting stats, like regenerating health per second, multipliers for coin pickups, defense from magic altogether, and another one for melee, negating all magical effects, and increasing health by a total percentage. With all that said and done, in between all of this, I could finally set up the hotbar system for consumables, so players can equip their loadout items for use in combat, and I made it specifically so if you run out, it still holds the item there, just in case you pick up more or buy some more along the way. Once again, the hotbar is upgradable via the blacksmith, starting off with just 2 slots. And now it's all ready to go. I set it so that the player can currently have 2 food items active at the same time, all of them but the potions stay active for a short amount of time. And that pretty much brings us up to date for where the game is at, and it would be a perfect breakpoint for another video. Because now I have to think about how I'm going to distribute this loot the best. And I would love to get your guys' opinion and feedback so far. So I've set up my own Discord server for the game and my other projects, and hopefully move towards some kind of vertical slice or playable build for the game this year or next. So please go hop on over there and check it all out. For the game itself, I want to distribute loot through chests for the most part, probably hand placed in each enemy based room. I also want a system where enemies will drop keys for loot rooms, where a loot room would be an additional type of room that spawns with no enemies and just has a load of chests. I'm also really on the fence about having enemies drop loot as well. I guess I'm just trying to find the right balance of dropping gold, the game's secondary currency called dust, dropping food items, dropping potions, and the balance between potions and food. I also have to keep in mind that when the player dies, they drop everything, so I have to work around that too. Additionally, there will also be micro-pub rooms, since the game is themed around a pub homeworld, where there will be little pub rooms to rest at in some small capacity, where they have a one-way drop system to send loot to the player's bank vault, and a bartender selling items they would normally have. Alright, that's all for now. I'll get part 2 of this video out sooner, I hope, so stay tuned. And if you like roguelikes, don't forget to roguelike this video.